The gym smelled of stale sweat and fractured egos. A group of active-duty Navy SEALs dominated the center mat, brutalizing each other in a sparring session. No one noticed the quiet woman pushing a broom in the corner. They thought she was just the cleaning staff. They were about to learn a terrifying lesson. The neon sign outside sputtered against the damp California marine layer, buzzing with a faint electrical hum that read, "Iron and Canvas Mixed Martial Arts." Located just a few miles off the Coronado Bridge in San Diego, the gym was a well-known haunt for the military elite. It wasn't a commercial fitness center. There were no mirrored walls or smoothie bars. It was a gritty, unforgiving warehouse stripped down to heavy bags, rusted kettlebells, and 4,000 square feet of blood-stained wrestling mats. For the past 3 weeks, the gym's floors had been meticulously maintained by a woman named Kora Dempsey. Kora wore an oversized faded gray hoodie, loose sweatpants, and a beat-up baseball cap pulled low over her eyes. Her movements were rhythmic and slow, pushing a wide bristle industrial broom across the taped seams of the mats. To the fighters who cycled in and out of the gym, she was an invisible fixture, a part of the background noise, like the hum of the old ceiling fans or the rhythmic thud of shin pads against heavy bags. She never made eye contact, never asked for autographs when minor UFC fighters rolled through, and never spoke above a whisper to the gym owner when collecting her meager paycheck. But Kora wasn't a janitor. She was a chief petty officer. More specifically, she was one of the first women to successfully integrate into the Naval Special Warfare Development Group JSOC's Elite Tier 1 unit. Currently, Kora was on a mandatory 60-day psychological decompression leave following a highly classified kinetic strike in the Horn of Africa. The mission had gone sideways, resulting in a 3-day evasion through hostile territory. She had survived, but her command mandated a stand-down period. Unable to sit still in her apartment, she had called an old mentor who owned Iron and Canvas and asked for menial labor. She needed the mindless repetition of sweeping. She needed to be near the familiar smell of athletic tape and adrenaline, but completely removed from the burden of command. On a muggy Tuesday evening, the gym was closed to the public. The only people inside were Kora, silently sweeping near the bleachers, and a 6-man detachment from SEAL Team 5. They were led by Lieutenant James Hackett. Hackett was a physical specimen, 6'2", 210 pounds of coiled muscle, with a reputation that preceded him on the West Coast. He was brilliant in a firefight, but notorious in the teams for his suffocating ego and a ruthless, almost toxic demand for perfection. Hackett had booked the gym for a private combative session to drill close-quarters hand-to-hand combat before their upcoming deployment to the Indo-Pacific. From the shadows beneath the pull-up rigs, Kora leaned her chin against the wooden handle of her broom. Her eyes, cool and analytical, tracked the men on the mat. Hackett was currently sparring with a younger petty officer named Tyler Brooks. Brooks was fast, relying on his collegiate wrestling background to shoot in and look for takedowns, but Hackett was simply overpowering him. It wasn't just a difference in skill, it was a difference in malice. Hackett wasn't teaching, he was dominating. He was using the younger operator to sharpen his own ego, throwing brutal elbows that stopped just a fraction of an inch from Brooks' orbital bone, snapping his hips into heavy sprawls that audibly drove the wind out of the younger man's lungs. "You're broadcasting your shots, Brooks," Hackett barked, his chest heaving slightly, sweat dripping from his nose. "In a confined space, if you drop your level like that, I'm putting a knee through your jaw. You're dead. Reset." Brooks nodded, his face flushed red, wiping blood from a split lip. "Hoo-yah, sir." Kora swept a pile of athletic tape and dust into her dustpan. She noted Hackett's stance. He was heavy on his lead foot. He favored his right side, dropping his left hand every time he pivoted. He relied entirely on his explosive, fast-twitch muscle fibers. He was strong, undeniably dangerous, but he was burning too much oxygen. He was fighting with anger, not water-like fluidity. Against a lesser opponent, his aggression was overwhelming. Against someone who understood how to redirect kinetic energy, he was a massive liability. Again, Hackett yelled, slapping his thighs. Brooks shot in for a double-leg takedown. Hackett defended it beautifully, catching Brooks under the armpits, spinning him violently to the mat, and immediately sinking his weight into a suffocating side control. But instead of transitioning to a submission or letting the younger guy work an escape, Hackett drove his forearm straight across the bridge of Brooks's nose, applying crushing downward pressure. It was a street brawl tactic, designed solely to inflict pain and panic. Brooks grunted, thrashing his legs, trying to bump his hips, but Hackett had his base set wide. "Breathe, Brooks. You're panicking." Hackett sneered, digging the bone of his forearm deeper into the cartilage. "You think a cartel sicario is going to tap you out? He's going to crush your windpipe. Get out of it." "Get out." Kora tightened her grip on the broom handle. The jaw clenched. There was a hard line between preparing a man for war and breaking him for sport. Hackett was crossing it. The other 4 SEALs sat against the padded wall, exchanging uncomfortable glances, but none of them possessed the rank or the audacity to correct their commanding officer. Brooks finally managed to turn his head, gasping for air, but Hackett immediately capitalized, sliding his leg over and wrapping Brooks' arm into an inverted Kimura lock. It was a devastating shoulder submission. Hackett cranked the arm backward. Brooks immediately tapped the mat with his free hand. Slap, slap, slap. Hackett didn't let go. He held it, increasing the torque by just a fraction of a degree. A singing tiled, scently etched entire world, stretching to its absolute limit echoed in the silent gym. Brooks let out a sharp, genuine cry of pain. Kora's eyes went dark. The mindless rhythm of her sweeping abruptly stopped. Clack. The sharp, sudden sound of a wooden broom handle cracking against the metal bleachers shattered the tense atmosphere on the mat. Hackett snapped his head up, his eyes locking onto the shadows in the corner. He slowly released Brooks' arm. The younger operator rolled away, clutching his shoulder, his face pale and contorted in agony. "Sorry," Kora said. Her voice was entirely devoid of apology. It was flat, calm, and utterly detached. She didn't look up from the floor, bending over to pick up her broom. Must have slipped. Hackett stood up, his broad chest rising and falling. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, glaring at the woman in the oversized hoodie. The adrenaline was still pumping through his veins, demanding an outlet. "Watch what you're doing over there," he snapped, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "We're trying to work." Kora resumed sweeping, making slow, deliberate strokes. "Work," she murmured just loud enough to carry across the open space. "Looked more like you were trying to tear a rotator cuff on a training partner who already surrendered." The gym went dead silent. The heavy breathing of the 4 men sitting against the wall completely ceased. Tyler Brooks, still sitting on the mat clutching his shoulder, stared at the cleaning lady in absolute horror. Hackett froze. A dark red flush crept up his neck. He took 2 slow steps toward the edge of the mat, closing the distance toward her. "What did you say?" Kora stopped sweeping. She finally looked up. Beneath the brim of her faded cap, her eyes were an icy, piercing blue. They didn't hold a fraction of the intimidation that usually preceded Hackett's presence. "I said you held a joint lock after the tap. It's sloppy ego-lifting, Lieutenant. Not tactical combatives. You keep relying on your upper body strength instead of hip leverage, and someone who actually knows what they're doing is going to snap your neck." One of the men on the wall let out a low, barely audible whistle. Hackett let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. He crossed his heavily tattooed arms, looking her up and down. He saw a slender woman in baggy clothes pushing a broom. To him, she was a civilian, an annoyance, a nobody. "Listen to me, sweetheart," Hackett said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I don't know what UFC fight you watched on television last night, but we don't play games here. This is Tier 2 level preparation. You sweep the floors. We do the fighting. So keep your mouth shut, mind your dustpan, and let the men handle their business." Kora didn't flinch. She leaned the broom against the wall with maddening slowness. "Tier 2, she repeated softly, almost to herself. She reached up and pulled the baseball cap off her head, revealing a tight, utilitarian braid of dark hair. "That explains why you leave your left flank completely exposed every time you shift your weight. Hackett's jaw tightened into a rigid square. The amusement vanished, replaced by a cold, searing anger. You think you know something about my stance. I know it's garbage, Kora replied evenly. The utter disrespect in her tone was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Hackett walked to the very edge of the mat, pointing a thick finger at her. Take off the shoes. Get on the mat. Sir, you can't be serious. Brooks groaned from the floor, struggling to his feet. She's just the cleaning staff. You can't fight a civilian. Shut up, Brooks. Hackett barked without breaking eye contact with Kora. She's got a lot of tactical advice for someone pushing dirt. Let's see if she can back it up, unless she wants to apologize and get back to cleaning the toilets. Kora looked at the 5 men staring at her. She looked at Hackett, practically vibrating with toxic pride. She felt the old, familiar hum of combat psychology waking up in the back of her brain. The 60 days of mandated peace and quiet suddenly felt very, very boring. I don't have a mouth guard, Kora stated simply. I won't hit you in the teeth, Hackett sneered. I'm just going to show you what leverage actually feels like. 5 minutes, submission grappling. You get me to tap, I'll personally scrub every toilet in this building for a month. I get you to tap, you bags, and you never step foot in this gym again while my team is here. Kora didn't say a word. She reached down and untied her beat-up sneakers, kicking them off to the side. She reached for the hem of her oversized gray hoodie and pulled it over her head, tossing it onto the bleachers. As the heavy fabric fell away, the atmosphere in the gym shifted violently. Beneath the hoodie, Kora wore a tight black compression rash guard. It clung to a physique carved out of granite. Her shoulders were broad and heavily muscled, her arms corded with thick veins. But it wasn't just her musculature that silenced the room. It was the scars. A jagged, angry line traced down her right bicep, the unmistakable remnant of a high-velocity, grazing gunshot wound. Another deep, circular burn scar sat just below her collarbone. She stepped onto the edge of the mat. Her footfalls made no sound. Her posture transformed from the slouched, invisible janitor into an apex predator. She didn't look like a civilian. She looked like violence personified. Hackett's eyes narrowed. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of doubt crossed his face, but his pride swiftly swallowed it. He dropped into a low wrestling stance, extending his hands. Whenever you're ready, sweetheart. Don't call me sweetheart, Kora said, her voice dropping an octave. She didn't take a traditional stance. She stood tall, relaxed, her hands resting loosely at her sides. Hackett lunged. He didn't hold back. He shot in with terrifying speed, aiming to wrap his thick arms around her waist, lift her off her feet, and slam her onto the canvas to prove an immediate, humiliating point. He expected her to backpedal. He expected her to panic. Instead, Kora stepped into the attack. As Hackett's head dropped to drive into her midsection, Kora pivoted her lead foot with razor-sharp precision. She didn't use her strength to stop his 210-pound mass. She used his own momentum against him. The left hand snapped down, securing a vice-like collar tie on the back of his neck, while her right arm shot under his armpit, securing a deep underhook. In a fraction of a second, before Hackett even realized his shot had missed, Kora dropped her hips, creating a massive vacuum of space beneath him. She twisted her torso with explosive, terrifying torque. Hackett felt his feet leave the mat. The world blurred. He didn't just fall, he was launched. Kora executed a flawless lateral drop, using his rushing momentum to throw his entire body weight over her hip. Crack! Hackett's back slammed onto the canvas with a concussive impact that echoed off the high warehouse ceiling. The breath exploded from his lungs in a ragged gasp. Before his brain could even register the impact, Kora seamlessly transitioned the throw, dropping her knee heavily onto his sternum, pinning him instantly in a crushing neon belly position. The gym was paralyzed. The 4 SEALs on the wall had leaped to their feet in shock. Kora stared down at the gasping lieutenant, her face an unreadable mask of ice. She leaned down, her face inches from his. "Like I said, Lieutenant," she whispered. Sloppy, Lieutenant James Hackett was not a man accustomed to the ceiling staring back at him. For a full 2 seconds, his brain refused to process the reality of his physical position. He was 210 pounds of highly trained elite infantry, and he was currently pinned to the canvas by a woman 90 pounds lighter than him. The heavy, crushing pressure of Kora's knee against his floating rib was a stark, agonizing reminder of his situation. A guttural roar of absolute humiliation ripped from Hackett's throat. Relying entirely on explosive strength, he bridged his hips violently, attempting to buck her off. A lesser grappler would have been launched into the air by the sheer force of the movement. But Kora wasn't a lesser grappler. She was a ghost on the mat. As Hackett bucked, Kora simply floated. She rode his upward momentum, completely unweighting her knee for a fraction of a second. And as he crashed back down, she dropped her hips again, transitioning smoothly into a high, suffocating full mount. She pinned his arms to his chest, her knees clamped tight under his armpits, completely neutralizing his upper body strength. "Get off me," Hackett snarled, thrashing his head from side to side. His face was a mask of crimson rage. His ego was bleeding out onto the mat in front of his entire detachment. He managed to rip his right arm free from her pin, and in a moment of pure, blinding frustration, he broke the fundamental rule of submission grappling. He closed his fist and threw a wild, heavy punch squarely at Kora's face. A collective gasp echoed from the wall. Brooks, still cradling his injured shoulder, shouted, "Sir, no strikes!" The punch carried enough kinetic energy to shatter a jawbone, but it never landed. Kora didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head 3 inches to the left. Hackett's fist grazed her ear, slamming uselessly into the mat. Before he could pull his arm back, Kora struck. Her right arm snaked behind his triceps, securing his extended limb. Simultaneously, she threw her left leg over his head, pivoting her hips 90 degrees with terrifying speed and flexibility. She fell backward, locking Hackett's trapped arm tightly between her thighs. It was a textbook, flawless armbar. Kora gripped his wrist with both hands, pulling it tightly to her chest, and clamped her knees together. She applied a slow, agonizing upward pressure on his elbow joint, using her hips as a fulcrum. "Tap," Kora said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the heavy breathing and the tension in the room like a scalpel. Hackett gritted his teeth, his neck veins bulging against his skin. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes. He refused to tap. He was a SEAL team commander. He did not submit. He tried to stack her, trying to drive his body weight forward to relieve the pressure on his elbow, but Kora had hooked her left foot under his opposite armpit, completely anchoring his posture. "Lieutenant," Kora warned, her tone shifting from detached to deadly serious. "You have about 3 degrees of rotation left before I snap your radius in half. It takes 6 months to rehab a compound fracture." Tap the map. "Go to hell," Hackett hissed through clenched teeth. Kora's expression hardened. She didn't crank it violently. She simply bridged her hips 1/2 an inch higher. A single father named with his elbow. The pain was sudden, sharp, and blinding. The primal survival instinct finally overrode his monumental ego. His free hand slapped the mat frantically. Slap, slap, slap. Kora held the lock for exactly 1 second longer than necessary, a deliberate, mirrored echo of what he had done to Brooks earlier. Then, with a fluid, dismissive motion, she released his arm and rolled backward, popping effortlessly to her feet. She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. She simply stood over him, her breathing slow and controlled, watching as Hackett rolled onto his side, cradling his hyperextended elbow against his chest, groaning in a mixture of pain and profound disbelief. The silence in the gym was absolute. The 4 SEALs sitting on the wall were frozen, their mouths slightly parted. Davis and Miller, 2 heavily tattooed breachers who usually had a joke for every situation, stared at the woman in the black rash guard as if she had just walked through a solid brick wall. "What in the hell is going on in my gym?" A booming, gravelly voice shattered the quiet. From the front office doorway emerged Tom Masterson. He was a massive, gray-haired man in his late 50s, sporting a faded military t-shirt and a permanent scowl. Masterson was the owner of Iron and Canvas, but more importantly, he was a retired Command Master Chief who had spent 30 years operating in the darkest corners of the globe. Masterson marched onto the mat, his heavy boots thudding against the canvas. He looked at the injured Brooks, then at Hackett groaning on the floor, and finally at Kora, who was calmly walking back to the bleachers to retrieve her hoodie. "Hackett," Masterson barked, coming to a halt, "I rent this space out to your detachment as a professional courtesy. I do not rent it out so you can turn it into a fraternity brawl." "Explain." Hackett struggled to a seated position, his face pale. He glared at Kora, pointing a trembling finger at her. "Your janitor. She attacked me." "Bah!" A short, harsh bark of laughter erupted from Masterson's chest. "My janitor. She jumped on the mat, started running her mouth about my stance, and then threw a cheap shot." Hackett spat, trying to salvage any shred of dignity in front of his men. "She's out of her mind." Masterson turned his gaze to the four men on the wall. "Is that what happened, Miller?" Miller swallowed hard, glancing nervously at his commanding officer before looking back at Masterson. No, Master Chief," respectfully. The lieutenant challenged her, and she dismantled him. "Sir." Masterson slowly shook his head, pinching the bridge of his nose. He looked down at Hackett, who was staring at the floor in humiliated silence. "Lieutenant Hackett," Masterson said, his voice dropping into a deadly quiet register that commanded absolute authority. "You have a reputation for being a hard charger, but you also have a reputation for being an arrogant son of a bitch who doesn't know when to turn it off. It seems your ego finally wrote a check your ass couldn't cash." "She's a civilian," Hackett protested, though the fight had completely left his voice. "Civilian?" Masterson echoed. He turned toward the bleachers. "Chief Dempsey, you want to clarify your civilian status for the lieutenant." The words Chief Dempsey hit the air like a localized bomb blast. Every man on the mat, including Hackett, froze. Their eyes darted toward the woman pulling the oversized gray hoodie back over her scarred shoulders. The title chief within the naval hierarchy commanded immense respect, but to hear it applied to the woman pushing a broom in a civilian gym was a mental short-circuit. Kora pulled her baseball cap back down over her braided hair, the shadow returning to her eyes. She picked up her broom. "Chief Petty Officer Kora Dempsey," Masterson announced to the stunned room, pointing a thick thumb at her. "Naval Special Warfare Development Group. She's been operating at Tier 1 for the last 5 years. You boys in Team 5 think you know what the sharp end of the spear looks like. You're looking at the woman who sharpens it." Hackett felt the blood drain from his face. The air in his lungs vanished. Devdra. It wasn't just that she was a SEAL. She was part of the most elite, highly classified counter-terrorism unit on the planet. The unit that handled the operations that officially never happened. The realization washed over him like a bucket of ice water. He hadn't just picked a fight with a civilian. He had challenged a Tier 1 operator, a woman who had likely seen more kinetic action in the last year than his entire detachment had seen in their careers. "She's on a mandatory decompression leave," Masterson continued, his eyes drilling into Hackett. "I let her sweep the floors because she needed the quiet. And you, in your infinite wisdom, decided to use her as a punching bag to stroke your own pride." "Oh." Brooks, still holding his shoulder, looked at Kora with a mixture of absolute awe and sheer terror. "You're the one," Brooks stammered, putting the pieces together. "The rumor about the high-value target extraction in Mogadishu last year. The operator who held the exfil corridor solo for 40 minutes. That was ill?" Kora didn't confirm or deny it. She just kept sweeping. "It was 45 minutes, actually," she murmured, her voice flat. "And the air support was late." Hackett slowly climbed to his feet. He cradled his right arm, his elbow throbbing with a dull, sickening ache. He looked at the woman he had just belittled, the woman he had threatened to kick out of the gym. His ego had been entirely atomized, replaced by a crushing, profound sense of professional shame. He took a step forward, his posture rigid, the arrogance entirely drained from his frame. "Chief Dempsey," Hackett said, his voice tight, "I apologize. I was out of line. I misread the situation entirely." Kora stocked her broom. She leaned on the wooden handle, turning her head to look at the towering lieutenant. The anger from the mat was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating gaze of a seasoned commander evaluating a subordinate. "You didn't misread the situation, Lieutenant," Kora said softly, but the acoustics of the gym carried every syllable. You read it exactly the way your ego wanted you to. You saw weakness and you exploited it to make yourself feel big in front of your boys. She gestured toward Brooks with her chin. That kid is supposed to trust you with his life when the bullets start flying. But you showed him today that you care more about winning a sparring match than you do about his safety. You hurt your own teammate. If you do that downrange, it won't be an armbar you have to worry about. It will be a body bag. Hackett swallowed hard. The truth of her words cut deeper than the submission hold. Yes, Chief. Understood. Leverage Hackett, Kora said, her voice softening just a fraction. In hand to hand, and in leadership, you don't lead by forcing your weight onto people until they break. You lead by creating space for them to move, and stepping in only when they lose their balance. Remember that on your next deployment. Hooyah, Chief, Hackett replied, offering a stiff, respectful nod. Kora didn't wait for a salute. She turned back to her dustpan, sweeping up a final pile of athletic tape and chalk dust. Masterson, she called out over her shoulder, I'm done for the night. I'll see you Thursday. Have a good night, Kora. Masterson smiled faintly. Without another glance at the 6 stunned men standing on the mat, Kora Dempsey picked up her dustpan, grabbed her battered sneakers, and walked silently out the back door of the gym. The heavy metal door clicked shut behind her, leaving Lieutenant Hackett and his detachment standing in the oppressive, humbling silence of the warehouse. They had come to iron and Candace to sharpen their edges for war. Instead, the cleaning lady had just taught them exactly what war actually looked like. Did Chief Dempsey's brutal lesson in humility leave you speechless? If you loved this intense story of a hidden Tier 1 operator putting a toxic lieutenant in his place, hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who appreciates real tactical drama, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more epic, gripping stories from the shadows. Drop a comment below with your favorite moment.